So if you give a quick wave to everyone, please, so they will all know who you are. She's been so kind to kind of lead us all through this today. She has a background in e-publishing and is super talented in this way, so she's going to walk us through some of the basics. And there's going to be a bit of time for Q&A as well. I'd ask that everybody mute their microphone while Clarice is talking, because any noise that you do make will pop you up on the main screen and distract from the conversation. And if you have any questions, you can just pop them in the group chat that you'll find on the right-hand side of your Google Plus Hangout screen. So if that's all okay, I'm going to hand over to you, Clarissa, and you can start and explain a little bit about your background.
Yes, that sounds good. Can you all hear me? It's good? Okay. Awesome. So, again, I'm Clarice. If you have any questions, then you can type them out in the chat sidebar where I'm going to send a message right now. I looked at the questions that were sent in by the group before this discussion, but I'm not sure how many of those folks made it to this group. So I think I'm just going to introduce myself and then ask what you guys are all here for. My experience is that I basically was like a popular blogger for a long time. I got some articles published in major venues. I was writing for Feministe for a while, and stuff would get cross-posted to places like Jezebel and The Guardian and these really major venues. And I knew that I had this really big audience. And I was also really looking for ways to monetize it because I was sort of trying to make it as a writer, and I knew that there had to be a way to capitalize on this huge audience that I had. And so I started looking into self-publishing, which was just starting to get really big in like 2011. So I just kind of figured it all out from scratch based on what people who were doing, like, you know, these romance novels and stuff like that, based on what they were doing. And I published a book that was #1 in 2 Amazon categories for about a week, which was really great. But it's actually not my biggest seller. My biggest seller is an ebook that compiles my best articles and blog posts over 4 years. So the first book is called Confessions of a Pickup Artist Chaser. I was writing about the pickup artist subculture, and that one also ended up getting acquired by a German publisher for a translation deal. I've also done some other books. I've done an anthology and some short stories, and I've just sort of tried to keep my toe in the market. Ultimately, for me, it is not paying me like a living wage, like having these ebooks out there, but it is paying me a few $100s every month to have these ebooks on the market, which is pretty good. And I think it's a good way for other places to kind of pay their hosting costs and like just approach the problem of the many different revenue streams that a freelancer needs to be successful. So would it be okay if we went around and just had everybody introduce themselves? Would that be okay, Charlotte? Okay, awesome. So maybe we can start with Sin Cooper. If you could unmute yourself and just say who you are and what brings you here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a playwright, a journalist, an author. I write a lot of stuff, and I have lots of different projects in different venues, and sometimes I'm just looking for a different way to approach something, whether it's, I don't know, a pamphlet, a play, a book that hasn't gotten picked up by a publisher, which is always a possibility. And so I have been following self-publishing for a while, and I just sort of wanted to upgrade my skills.
I'm Gina. Hi. I am a freelance writer, so this is of interest to me in the possible publishing book ideas category of things. I work with 2 magazines that are thinking, they're very different places, but they're both thinking about how to approach self-publishing digitally next year. So I was really curious to hear what's worked and how, and what realistic expectations are, how much labor goes into it, what numbers are good sales numbers, that kind of thing.
That makes sense. One thing to keep in mind, actually, is that The average ebook seller, as of the last figures that I saw in this, makes less than like $500 a year on their ebooks. So I think probably since most of us are people with followings and, you know, a background in writing, most of us are going to perform above the average. But that is the average. And those stories that you hear about people who make like millions of dollars really are like huge outliers. And it's important to just like temper your expectations and keep that in mind.
So I'm a professor of women's studies at Cal State San Marcos, and I've published a bit in academic journals and university presses. But my co-editor and I recently did or compiled an anthology on women's health, and we're having we've sent it out to academic presses, to trade presses, and we're having a horrible time getting presses to accept it. It includes some academic essays, but also narratives and excuse me, poetry and fiction and nonfiction. So what publishers are saying is that the publishing world has changed so quickly that they're not publishing anthologies, and they're not doing a lot of mixed anthologies with fiction and nonfiction and poetry. So we're thinking about going the self-publishing route.
That totally makes sense. Anthologies, my understanding is that they just do terribly in general. I actually have an anthology that I did last year with a pretty famous technology writer, and it didn't do that well. He's famous. He's more famous than me, and we got contributions from some other writers who are like fairly well known, but I mean, it just didn't go anywhere. And I was actually talking about doing an anthology with a pretty famous writer this year, and she was really like behind it. Like she was super, super psyched about it, and she has a press too. But there's a finance person at the press who totally just vetoed it. Like, he was just like, nope, like, you are not doing this. If you two want to do this, then you have to, like, crowdfund it and, like, do it yourselves, like, self-publish it. And again, this is someone who started her own press. Like, she actually, like, has been in this market writing about sexuality for, like, 20 years. So it was just incredible to see this happen, where her finance person was just like, you absolutely can't do this. Like, I'm going to argue you down from this, whatever it takes.
Hi. So I'm here on behalf of Aaron Tron. I'm a filmmaker and a writer, and I'm the editor of the Independent's Guide to Film Distribution, second edition. And so I'm here because we're not only are we doing a print version of the book, but we are also doing an accompanying ebook. So I'm just here to learn more about that.
My name's Wagatwe Wanjuki, and I'm more so of a blogger. I do some writing, and I've just always been thinking about possibly doing an ebook for years. So I just wanted to get some more information about it, see if it's a feasible idea, and if so, how to go about it.
I was going to say I'm mostly interested in the tools as opposed to the marketing side or the selling side, but just what publishing platforms, self-publishing platforms you've used and how they've worked out for you, and costs.
We talked about this earlier, in that it's sort of, there's a mental barrier already if you haven't done e-publishing into what you should be using to create your book and how you then export it and upload it to Amazon or wherever you choose to sell it. So I wonder if we could go through some of those really basic mechanics before we kind of pull out and look at how you might turn like a series of articles into a narrative in a book.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to paste a link into the sidebar, which is something that I wrote last year that's just about like the basics of formats and platforms and like which formats are used where and whatever. And you can read that later just to sort of catch up with that part of the conversation. But basically, the ebook market is still very like Wild West-like. If that makes sense. Like, there are a lot of different people doing a lot of different things, and there have emerged some major players, notably Amazon. Amazon is like the 800-pound gorilla of the space, and it kind of gets to do whatever it wants as a result, which is pretty frustrating. But you can make it work for you in some ways. So a lot of these different platforms take different formats of file, which means that you might need to have your book, you might have to format it in one way and then do it over in a different format for a different platform. Usually doc files work okay. In fact, there's one service called Smashwords which takes doc files and then converts them into all of the other like types of file. So you can take a doc file and just like feed it into Smashwords, and it will become an EPUB and a PDF and a MOBI and all that kind of stuff. The other cool thing that Smashwords does is it ultimately syndicates all of your books to a lot of different ebook platforms. So if you have a book on Smashwords, then eventually, as long as it meets their formatting guidelines, then eventually that book will get syndicated to places like Kobo, which is Sony's platform, and Barnes & Noble, and Apple iBooks, and all these different places. The notable exception is that it takes a long time for Smashwords to syndicate to Amazon. So really, a lot of the time what I suggest is that people just do their Amazon books separately and then put it on Smashwords, and Smashwords will just get it into all these other places. The formatting can be a little bit challenging. So if you are technically adept, especially if you know HTML and you know like Word pretty well, and you're willing to sit down and read through all of these guidelines and learn like new tags and stuff like that, you can do it. It will take you a while. That's what I did. But there are also professionals who are emerging who are basically professional ebook formatters. So if you're willing to drop like a few $100s on getting your ebook formatted for different platforms, then you can just find someone and hire them. There are also services that are emerging that I think are really interesting. One example is Booktrope. If you go to booktrope.com, they talk about this, where you can basically assemble a team to work on your book through this service. So like you submit the manuscript, and it gets read by some like initial beta readers. And then if it makes the cut, it gets into their sort of like back end, which is called Teamtrope. And in Teamtrope, you can like assemble a team of these different ebook professionals who are going to help you out. So you can find like a copy editor, maybe like a regular editor, you can find a cover designer, you can find a formatter, you can find all these different like people all in one place, and then the way you negotiate it is all of them get a different cut of the results of whatever you put out. And there's like standard cuts that people give. Like I think, for example, I think cover designers usually get like 4% or something like that of the profits. But I don't actually know all of them because I've never actually used Booktrope myself. I've usually just done most of it myself. These days, I pretty much always get the cover designed by somebody else. I've thought about outsourcing the formatting too, but at this point I've done it for so many things that it doesn't feel reasonable for me to do that. But definitely if I was starting out, I would consider hiring someone to do that. So once you have the book all formatted, you put it on these different self-publishing platforms, and then you will get a certain percentage of each sale. At Amazon, this is usually 70%, but there's a lot of markets where they give you 35%. For example, I think in India, that's one of their markets where you only get 35% of sales. One of the reasons this is true is that Amazon is trying to force people to give Amazon exclusivity over ebooks that they put on Amazon. And so the way they frame this is they offer you the option of giving them exclusivity, and then if you like take this exciting offer, you get 70% instead of 35% in these other markets. I find this really, really irritating personally, but like it is what it is. I know why they're doing it. And I can't remember what all of them are. I think maybe one of them is Brazil, maybe one of them is Japan. They're usually other countries where you only get 35% unless you buy into exclusivity with Amazon. At Smashwords, you get 80, maybe it's 80%. It varies sometimes, and sometimes these different platforms change it. But I think at Smashwords, it's 80% of the sales on Smashwords because people can buy your book directly from the Smashwords.com website, when it gets syndicated to other sites, you get less. So it's usually something like you're getting like 60%, 50% of the sales on Kobo or Barnes & Noble. Does that make sense? That's kind of a basic overview. If you want to learn all of the different ebook formats, it's kind of interesting and fun, especially if you're like technically minded. If you already know HTML, for example, you'll probably have a pretty easy time with it. But it is very time consuming. Again.
It's a framing question. From your experience, like to the group, obviously, like where I think a lot of people here are freelancers or are working within collectives, putting out their own work. How much time would you say is worth investing in the production end, in creating the ebook, due to what you get out of it? Like for freelancers who probably have a bit of a following, who think they can definitely make some sales from it.
A lot of it depends on what kind of promotion you have access to. Because the thing about self-publishing is you're just going to have to do all of your own promotion, basically. If you're in a platform like Booktrope, which is the company that I mentioned earlier, where they match you up with different book professionals like formatters and cover designers and stuff, you can find book publicists within Booktrope. So sometimes you can hire people like freelancers to help you publicize your book. And depending on the vertical that you can get pretty healthy sales, especially, I mean, erotica is the one that people are obviously like always up on, but like erotica books often do really well. I actually have an erotica book out because I like mostly write about sexuality and I thought it was worth a try. My erotica book has done terribly. I think that's because I didn't normally write about it and it wasn't like my thing, you know? So I just wasn't that excited about writing it. I wrote it mostly to see if I could. I like what I wrote, but it's not the book that I'm most passionate about, and you're really going to need a lot of passion to get out there and promote it. So if you have a lot of followers on Twitter, and especially if you have access to publishing on platforms like major newspapers, major blogs, like really big ones, you know, like I guess like Thought Catalog or Jezebel or these other really big ones, then if you can get on there and promote your book, you will get some sales. It's not necessarily always a really great bet in terms of the money. And again, this is especially true when it comes to things like anthologies. Like there are types of books that publishers kind of already know aren't going to do that well. And sometimes it's worth getting those books out as like a passion project or as a prestige project. Like for me, when I published my anthology with Julian Dibble, he's a pretty famous writer. I was really passionate about the topic. I've gotten some lectures at like pretty major universities out of this anthology. So for me, it was worth it. But it's really not going to have good sales, I think, pretty much ever. I think I've only made like a total of like a couple $100 on that. So you kind of have to think about whether you really think a lot of people are going to buy this. And it helps to, if you know people in the established book trade, see if they have an instinct about whether it'll make a lot of sales. Because they might, I mean, for me initially, I was like, oh, obviously an anthology will sell a lot of copies because it has all these different authors and all the different authors will promote it. But the truth is that a lot of authors don't promote anthologies that heavily if they have an essay in it. Like some of them will, but most of them won't. And also, buyers usually want to get a book by a person. They don't necessarily want an anthology of a whole bunch of different things unless they have this particular type of mindset. Another thing to keep in mind, if you have sort of like pull at universities or something like that, and you could get a book used as a course text or something like that, then that might be great. But self-publishing, it just doesn't necessarily have the cachet of standard old publishing. So the kind of stuff that tends to do better on self-publishing is sort of like more popular stuff, right? So my book, Confessions of a Pickup Artist Chaser, which was about sort of like travels among the pickup artists, has done pretty well because that's a really like popular subculture. But honestly, even that book, it was just a little bit more a little bit more sort of like theoretical and like smart than the market wanted, I think. And this is what people tell me, you know. So I mean, I do things like I have a chapter about like rape culture in there and stuff like that, and which is like really important stuff from a feminist perspective, but it's not necessarily the kind of thing that is going to have people knocking down your door trying to buy it. And I think that this is why like the people who have self-published and really succeeded have been people like, and by succeeded I mean made like millions of dollars, have been people who wrote like popular fiction, like fantasy, science fiction, erotica, romance, or people who really focus on like pop culture. Like there was a journalist last year who self-published an ebook that was incredibly successful. His name was Alan Sepinwall. But his ebook was like a cultural analysis of a bunch of different TV shows that were really popular. So for him, I think there was kind of a perfect storm in there in terms of like, he hit all these different popular TV shows. He was already a TV critic, so he had access to all these different platforms where he could write about his book and mention it. He could insert links to his book in his bio, stuff like that. With all this having been said, I think that the market is still maturing. It's still figuring itself out. And we don't completely know yet what is really going to make it and what isn't. So I'm very cautious about making predictions usually. But I just try to encourage people to keep in mind, like, this is a risk. You probably aren't going to make a huge amount of money. You might make some money if you are a popular writer who can leverage a following in some way. But who knows? You might like be the next big thing. I don't know.
I'm going to put one more big question out there. That was one of the questions that came up a few times when people were first interested in this conversation. And that's about turning, I guess you spoke about turning 4 years of work into an ebook, and some other people have written their own series with other news organizations, or for other news organizations, and they want to now turn that into something like, I guess would be more of an e-single than an ebook because it's not going to run as long. How do you make that work? And what's the kind of difference there between turning your like a series of articles into something to resell on this platform or to re-promote on this platform?
So I think anthologies don't necessarily do well where you have a whole bunch of different authors. But one thing that does seem to do pretty well is actually the kind of like best of stuff where you take a bunch of your own stuff and make it into a book. So what I did with what is basically my top seller, the S&M Feminist, which is like the best of Clarice Thorne, is I just went through all of my articles, found the best ones, and then I just wrote introductory pieces, and I'm happy to send a copy of that book to anybody who wants to see it. But it's kind of the stuff that you would imagine. It's just like, here's when I wrote this like essay, here's how I was feeling, here's how it fits in with these other things, I also, with all of my books, I have had a lot of my readers like beta read them, like crowdsourced the sort of initial editing process, because I have a lot of really dedicated readers, so I'm able to do that. You can hire editors to do this too, if you don't feel like you really want to trust it to like a large group. But so one of my readers for the S&M Feminist suggested that I put like study guides in each section of the book. Like, here are some questions to ask yourself, like, how did this make you feel? What did this make you think about, etc. And I've heard from other bloggers that these types of books are really successful, generally. And I think part of it is just that the blog itself is often really intimidating. Like when people find a new blog and they want to get into it, or they've heard that this blogger is really good, they'll like go to the blog page and they'll just be like, oh my god, there's like 10 years of articles, what do I do? So if you're just like, look, I packaged it here, you can read all of my best stuff, it's neatly organized, it explains my thought process, it's $6, then people will totally go for that. I'm not sure, I guess one thing that I've suggested for bloggers who have like a really big following, like if you're like feminist or something like that, right? Then you're going to be gathering articles by multiple people maybe, but you're also going to have an opportunity to have people like vote on what goes into the like best of collection, right? And that is like a really good opportunity to engage with your community and also to get a sense of like what they actually want in there, right? So it serves a lot of different purposes. I find that the more steps you can figure out a way to engage with your commenters on, or like your readers or your community or your Twitter followers or whatever, the better it is, because it makes the final product better and because it publicizes whatever you're making. And people feel a lot of loyalty to these books if they feel like they were involved in making them.
I wonder if you've ever toyed around with these sort of multimedia packaging ebook things, like Apple Books or iPad Books or whatever in the world they're called, where you can integrate video and sound and the kind of atavisty kind of experience. If you know anything about the payoffs, benefits, or dear God help you warnings that one should engage before going down that route.
I know a little bit about it, but not a lot. I know that there are people who have had some success doing comic-y kind of things. Erin Polgreen, I think is her name, is someone who has a digital magazine of comics journalism called Symbalia. So if you look up Symbalia, you can kind of get a sense for how she's doing it. And that's been pretty successful. It sounds like she actually is like taking in some serious revenue with subscriptions to Symbalia. I know that Kindle has like a comic book creator option. If you're uploading something to Kindle, then there's a, I haven't used it, it's new, and I don't really do comics, but if you are in like the Kindle interface, it will be like, do you want to use the comic book creator right now? Definitely when I was doing it in 2012, I thought a couple of times about trying to put in like pictures and figures and stuff, but it is a little bit of a hassle. I think they're getting better at it every time, like every month or so, like someone's iterating on it and trying to do something better. But one complication is that the text is like the ebook itself has to fit onto every platform that people are looking at it on, right? So if you have an ebook that has to function on all the different types of Kindle and like iPads and computers and like whatever, then it's much easier for the formatting if it's just text. Because the text can just flow and be like resized easily and all that kind of stuff, and it's not necessarily easy to do that with images. But there are procedures for getting the images into these books. And I think that this is something that we're going to see more of as well, because there's just too much demand for it. They can't like ignore it, you know, forever. So yeah, I guess if you're interested in doing something with like integrated videos, I don't think Kindle supports that, but it might by now. You might want to check. I'm pretty sure Smashwords doesn't. I don't know about the other like book platforms. Yeah, I guess I can't be super helpful on this. I would look into the Kindle comic thing. And if you can get in touch, like if you're really interested in doing something like that, and you don't necessarily have the bandwidth to like figure out all of the formatting stuff, then again, hiring a professional formatter can probably solve that problem, at least a little bit.
I was just wondering, have you ever made a print book and an ebook side by side, and what was your experience with that, if yes?
Oh man, so I actually really like doing that. I really like doing it for several reasons. One is it's extra work. It's not that much extra work. If you're already releasing your book on Amazon and Smashwords, then it takes like maybe an extra day to format it for a print.
Oh, okay.
I mean, if you're like used to the process. So the platform that I use for that is called CreateSpace.
Oh, that's what we're using. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay.
CreateSpace is really functional, and I mention it in the blog post that I posted in the chat channel, the e-publishing one. The nice thing, one of the nice things about CreateSpace too, so it gives a really nice like print-on-demand book. The physical books get syndicated to Amazon. So that means that your book looks really legit on Amazon.
Okay.
It's like, okay, like here's your like ebook for like $6, and then here's your physical book for like $15, and people are kind of used to seeing that.
Yeah.
So it makes it look more legit, and it also makes it look like it sort of advertises the ebook a little bit, because it's obvious that the price is lower. Like it's easier to sell ebooks when it's clear that they are the cheap alternative, right?
Yeah.
So it looks really cool. And the quality of print on demand is really excellent these days. The main thing about print on demand is that if you want a whole bunch of those books, you then have to buy them at the price that it costs to make each one. Like if you're with like a press or something like that, or somebody who can get wholesale prices, like these sort of like discounts, then you're paying a lot less per book. Whereas if you need to get like 10 copies of your book through CreateSpace, you're going to be paying like $5 per copy.
Right. Yeah. Do you suggest doing the formatting for the ebook first and then going to CreateSpace? Because it seems like that's more difficult than, making the PDF to export to CreateSpace.
So usually what I do if I'm going to release it in multiple formats, so when I first did my first book, I did it in one format first, and that was like, it was fine. Part of it was that I was crunched for time. I had this like crazy storm of stuff happening. Like I was about to speak at South by Southwest.
Oh wow!
And I like really, really, really wanted my book to be done by the time I went to South by Southwest, and I only had time to finich one format. Okay. So I was like, this book is going to be out on Amazon, and I'm going to get everyone in the audience to buy it, and that was part of why it was so successful.
Right.
But after I did that, I mean, the other thing that happened too, just having it out on Amazon that week, was I had it at this low price, and I was like, if you want it, you are going to have to buy it on Kindle. And since Kindle books can be read on computers, a lot of people bought it even if they didn't have Kindles. That was why the book was able to hit these like #1 slots, because like all of my followers bought it in this one format because they had to, right?
Right.
But it kind of engendered some like bad feelings too, because people were like, why don't you have it out in these other formats? Like, I would really like it in these other formats, etc. So that's kind of a tricky line to walk. What I do now is I do all of the formats before I release any of them.
Okay.
So I do the Kindle format, then I do the Smashwords format, and if I'm doing a CreateSpace, like a print-on-demand one, I do that one last. And another good reason to do this is that it helps you catch problems in the book, like typos and issues and stuff like that, because there's always some of those, and the more times you go over it, the more likely you are to catch them. So my initial version of Confessions of a Pickup Artist Chaser was like messy and like had a bunch of typos and like all kinds of stuff. But like after I had gone through it, like all the different times that I had to do it for Kindle and Smashwords and CreateSpace, it was pretty good. So that's just like sort of like a background reason to do all those different formats. Just like seeing it in all these different places is really like healthy for the process.
And before you even go, like, for when you're doing the Kindle or the Smashwords or the CreateSpace, is there anything that you use before it goes to, like, those kind of final versions? Like, do you use any other, like, programs for that?
I use Word, yeah. I mean, so I'm kind of like old school when it comes to my relationship to the internet, and like sometimes I think I should like get some of these sort of like convenience-ifying tools.
Right, yeah.
But I am like accustomed to working in like basic HTML. I have for like more than 10 years.
Okay.
So for me it's just like, okay, I'm gonna make the file as like a text file, and then I'll like put it over here, you know? Since a lot of the time, one thing about ebooks is that you can switch from location to location. You can put hyperlinks in there using the anchor tag.
Right,
which is, I think, called like the bookmark tag, or like the bookmark function in Word.
Okay.
So you can make a file in Word where you have like a table of contents which uses those tags to like skip between chapters and stuff like that. Yeah. And you can also skip to endnotes. So one irritating thing about ebooks is that you can't have footnotes because the text has to flow.
Oh, okay.
which I find insanely irritating because I love footnotes, but I've totally just like managed to work around it by having endnotes. And then whenever I have an endnote, I give it a number, but I also allow people to click on the endnote and go to the endnote and then click back and go back to the original place where they saw it. You can do that. And if you make the file in Word, then you can do all of those anchors using the I think it's called the bookmark function.
Okay.
And then if you export the file as HTML, you can basically use that as your sort of like basis for the Amazon file. I think that you can upload doc files to Amazon.
I think you have to just make it in Word and then export as or save as PDF and then do that, right?
Yeah, maybe. I sort of prefer the precision of doing it straight in HTML for Amazon, because then you can like control. There's like a couple of specialized tags that you can use on Amazon, like for page breaks and stuff like that. In Smashwords, you can upload this like text. You can upload this doc file to Smashwords, and it will give you all these different formats back. But there's a lot of ways in which it's clumsy. One of the ways is that you can't do page breaks. So I think maybe it does sometimes do page breaks automatically, like for EPUB files, but sometimes they're in weird places and stuff like that. So like for me, I kind of reached a point where I was like, I'm doing it in HTML, I'm doing it in doc, and like I'm doing it in CreateSpace. I refuse to also make an EPUB file. You know?
Yeah.
But like you could do that if you wanted, especially if you're hiring a professional formatter, there's almost no reason not to have them do all these different formats for you.
Well, I'll be doing it. So but thank you so much. It's very helpful.
I have a question about length. If you think there is any, page length that is too little or too big.
So short stories tend not to do well. Like I know that short pieces, depending on how you're doing it, if you have like a smash hit on Amazon or something, a lot of people will have like big smash hit, and then they'll have like a short story that they release as sort of like an extra thing that you can also buy. But in general, short lengths aren't super popular, and it is, you can tell when you're looking on Amazon, it gives like a page count for how long it is, and a lot of people like specifically want like X amount of words, or like X number of pages, So, but shorter is better for the longer stuff. So like, as near as I can tell, you don't necessarily derive a lot of benefit from doing like 400 pages as opposed to like 120 pages, if that makes sense. Right. So you don't want something that is like 20 pages long, but if you have something that's like 80 pages long or more, that's usually enough. And I think in general with people's sort of like reduced attention spans these days, that might be in your interest to try and do like just like a shorter one, because it's easier to produce, it's obviously quicker to write, all that kind of stuff. A lot of journalists who have put out ebooks have put out those sort of like short, like 80-page, 120-page, just like brief treatments of a person or a subject or whatever. Again, someone to look up, his name is Alan Siepenwall, and I'll spell out his name in the chat window so you can look him up if you want. But he did a really popular sort of like journalistic arts and culture ebook last year, and there's a bunch of interviews with him about his process of doing that. He actually pitched it to editors and everything before he tried going independent, and none of the major like publishing companies wanted it, and then he published it online and it was like a huge hit. So that might be a good example. I think there was another one too. There was one that I heard about that was an ebook by a guy. Do you guys know? So John McAfee was this like insane like software guru who like totally went rogue a while back. I think it was earlier this year. Was like down in Belize with like drugs and like local women. I don't know if any of you saw this. It was like totally absurd, this like ridiculous meltdown, and there were articles everywhere about it. Anyway, there was a journalist who wrote like a short book about John McAfee that he totally just like slammed into the middle of the coverage, and he managed to get, I guess he had contacts with the New York Times or something, because he managed to get mentioned in like the New York Times article about John McAfee. And I think he really made a lot of money on that. So yeah, again, if you can pinpoint trends and you can just like get out a short ebook, you will totally clean up. For other stuff, it's a little bit more complicated. Shireen has a question in the sidebar that I'm going to read. I'm not sure I totally get what the question is. The question is, how often does not getting publishers to publish a book generate ebooks instead? So do you mean like how many people, are you asking like how many people try to pitch publishers and then fail and then like publish it on their own?
Can you hear me?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yes. That was my question when you talked about the author Alan. Do you know how often that happens, or is that a trend? And I get so many questions about or challenges with agents or publishers and that kind of thing, and most people sort of do their own self-publishing as a result. So I was just wondering if there was any data on that.
I haven't seen data on it, but there's definitely a lot of people doing it, a lot. I mean, for me, like, I pitched a book a lot like the S&M Feminist to publishers, I think like a year and a half before I just self-published it, and none of them took it. And it's funny because if they had, then that book would have been on shelves when like the 50 Shades of Grey like trend like hit. It would have been like done, you know? And I'm still just like, man, that is too bad. But it is what it is. I think, so one thing that, there's a publishing analyst named Jane Friedman. I'm going to put her name in the sidebar too so that you can look her stuff up, because she's very smart, and her work is worth reading, just like her analysis of the market and where it's going. But I was talking to her a while back, and what she was saying is that she thinks that the savviest authors are looking at every single deal separately. So it's not really like there are people who will say like self-publishing, like only do self-publishing, and they're like evangelists in a way. Like they'll say things like, I would never ever sign with a legacy publisher again. One example of this attitude is Joe Conrath. I'm going to type him out in the sidebar too. He has a blog that is really well known about self-publishing, and his attitude is basically like legacy publishing is done and you should never do it, and you are a fool if you do it. He's very aggressive about it. And his blog is a useful resource, but that attitude is one that I kind of can't get behind, and I think it kind of scares a lot of people away from trying to get these sort of like higher profile deals or the support that they could get with a publishing house. So yeah, I mean, I think that it is worth, if you think that you can get your book published by a professional publishing house, there are a lot of advantages to doing that. I mean, you'll get, like, a lot of this stuff that I've been talking about will just be taken care of, right? Like, someone else will do the formatting, someone else will do the cover design, like, they'll hopefully do some publicity, although a lot of authors complain that publishing houses basically don't do publicity, and that they have to do as much publicity with a publishing house as they would if they were just publishing on their own. I think a lot of people are really, really dissatisfied about that. But I mean, the advantages of going it on your own are that you get this like huge chunk of the royalties. You can end up with like 7 times as much money. I mean, if your book sells as many copies if you self-publish as it would with the publishing house, then you make so much more money. But like, can you rely on that? Like, are you willing to do all these other details? Are you willing to do all your own marketing? And like, it's nice in some ways to have all of this extra control over what you're doing. Like, it's nice to get your own cover illustration and like do your own formatting and like not have to like bow to the whims of an editor. But a lot of the time, like, publishers know what they're doing with that stuff too. So anybody who might be able to get a major deal, like, it's worth doing. Like for me, I think I already mentioned this, but my first book got a translation deal with a German publisher. So I knew people who were like, well, really what you should do is you should take your book and you should get it translated on your own, and then you can collect all those royalties for all those other countries too. And I was like, okay, but I don't really know the German market. And I don't really like feel like doing all that extra work for something that I really don't know how well it's going to do. And the advantage of going with this publisher in Germany was that they were like super gung-ho about me. So the woman had read it in English, and she was like incredibly psyched, and she like made my book in German like the centerpiece of their new season of books. And they like flew me to Berlin for like a publicity tour, and they got me on TV like 4 times. It was wild. So like that is the kind of thing that I absolutely could never have done on my own in Germany. But I mean, the reason I got that too is partly because I self-published the book in the first place. So like, who knows?
I guess it'd be nice to kind of wrap on, like, what are the key things that people should be thinking about before they embark on doing this kind of project? And then I just want to say, if there's anything that people feel hasn't been covered and they haven't had time to ask, or they don't necessarily want to ask in public, you can follow up by email with me and Clarice. You have our contacts. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for coming. If you have any questions, you're welcome to email me. I do also do some consulting on this, although I actually recently, yesterday, I got an offer letter for a full-time job that is in this space, and I am like super, super excited about it. So my time is going to be pretty wrapped up, but hopefully I can help people out still. Yes, like the things that I think people really should keep in mind are, it's like writing anything. We all know this because we're all writers. We all know that this is not the job that you take if you want to make $1 million. You know, like you need to really love it to try it out. And I think you need to be passionate about it. And I think the places where I've gone astray in terms of publishing ebooks, like I mentioned this erotica novel that I wrote last year, and I did it really, I mean, honestly, I did it because I thought I might make money on it. And again, I was happy enough to write it, and I'm happy with how it came out, but I don't promote it with the same passion that I promote my other books. And I think maybe my readers don't necessarily see the same passion in it as they see in my other books. And that's really important. And like in a certain way, like you really have to be competitive. Like your passion and your expertise is part of your competitiveness in this market, because it is full of people who are really smart and working really hard. And like people have so many options for like books to read, and if you don't care really, really deeply, you aren't going to do your best work, and you really have to do your best work. So yeah, and again, I would say check out Book Trope. I just wrote it in the sidebar too. If you really don't want to do all this different stuff, Book Trope is a good way to think about getting a team to help you out. Another interesting company is 99 Designs, which allows you to like run a contest to do things like book covers. And if you know other people who have self-published, then they can help you out. They can probably give you like book designer recommendations or whatever. Yeah, that's about it. Just be ready to do the work and be ready to enjoy it. Are there any other questions?
No, I think we're good. So thank you so much, Clarice, for sharing some time with us. Thank you, everyone else, for turning up. I hope it's been helpful, and enjoy the rest of your day. This is it.